Hey guys, this is Chris from Deus Ex Machina. No bad or good news today, so story time. I've been a game master probably since the early 90s, and my history of role playing is only slightly longer. I've been a GM for almost the entirety of my gaming life. There are very few moments where I was a player, and in almost every one of those situations, those games never ran very long. The GM generally loses interest or kind of gives up. And if you ask GMs and players about their favorite moments, I imagine that none of them would ever speak of a moment where the dice rolled in their favor. I don't think there's anyone's going to be a story about this is the time where I rolled a natural 20.
I picked up the dice and threw 2 sixes.
I can include maybe 3 or 4 seconds of that clip, but I do remember that scene from Red Dwarf as being a perfect example of what people don't do. They don't speak of how well they rolled dice that day.
Another 2 sixes!
In almost every situation, and this is why it's called a role-playing game, folks, not a dice-chucking combat game, because ultimately players will remember the moments of character, of interaction, of storytelling, of something that happened. And most likely players will remember moments where they felt they had complete control. GMs will be a different story. It's not about letting players have complete control, which oftentimes they do, but moments where it was a collaboration. There are some players that insist that it's a fight with the GM, when in truth, a lot of GMs, the good GMs, think it's a collaboration. We're working together to tell a story. I'm going to say no to you. I'm going to say yes to you with your ideas. Sometimes your ideas won't work, and sometimes they will. And I do have moments from my games that I think about today going, that was amazing. I have a couple runners-up I'll mention, and I'll try to create context so you guys understand. If I'm just saying, well, there's this one guy where Jimmy said this, and that was funny.
Anyway, I picked up the dice again.
But it comes to what I'll say is my absolute favorite. I probably could run a list. I introduced a monster that was just so horrific. I spent time explaining them, and one player just went, "That's horrible. I need to not be here right now." I have had situations where I generally have a boss fight. I generally have a villain. I also have very often teased the villain. I had a conversation with How to RPG about whether or not GMs should put opponents in front of players that they cannot defeat. And I say all the time. Every season of my Amethyst campaign, there's always going to be an enemy that players cannot defeat the first time they encounter it. But of course, they will encounter it again when they're better. And the elation of players defeating that person after it had defeated them, it's one of the greatest feelings players can get through. That's the reason why I like the fact that if you're going to present a monster the players can't defeat, make sure you bring that back up so when they're stronger, they can defeat it, and they will treasure that victory more than any other battle that you have in that campaign. But I wanted to get to the specific one I'm thinking of, and this was in my Amethyst campaign. Now, that being said, if once I start explaining this, people who've read Amethyst will go, that's not in any of the Amethyst books, because the Amethyst series is well ahead of where the books are. Book 3 is coming out. I could probably write another 5. So in this situation, there's a section of North America, of Canum, that is a wasteland. It's just basically desert. And there is a bastion that is on wheels, that is moving from other region to region and raiding and going to static outposts and raiding them for food and supplies. Some people might think that this is similar to Mortal Engines. The irony is that I could say this did not happen a couple of years ago. This happened more than 10 years ago, before Mortal Engines came out, before the novel was even written, which it happens. But I don't think the idea of a giant city on wheels or on treads is something that they own the copyright to. We just saw it also in John Carter. There was a city that was a predator city. And it was encroaching on a fantasy kingdom, an immobile, traditional fantasy kingdom. And the players needed to stop this city from basically steamrolling this fantasy kingdom. That's the setup. Now, we need to trace back a couple months earlier. The players are going through a region called Baruch Malkuth. Baruch Malkuth, for those people who do know Amethyst, who don't know Amethyst, is this evil kingdom. It is a human-centric slave kingdom that enslaves non-humans, and as a result, like the allegory that it is, have prospered. And unfortunately, they are so powerful, no kingdoms have been able to successfully convince other kingdoms to unite in a war against them, because they know the entire continent would be just a lot of death and so forth. And so this kingdom has been allowed to flourish. And one of the ways that they basically break the spirit of the fey creatures they enslave is that if it comes down to the worst of it, they employ something called a halo, which is this horrific artifact that's mentioned, I think, in the first book, and the rules for it are explained in the second book. And this item basically is placed over a fey's head and can effectively rewrite their personality to become completely docile and subservient. It's a horrific artifact. It's meant to be a disturbing artifact. And in the setting, it's explained that there are only about 4 of these that were ever made. And whoever made them, we don't know who made them. We don't know how they made them. All we know is that there's 4 and no one's been able to replicate them or so. And these have all been very tightly controlled so that these things don't get out. And as a result, there are rewards for their acquisition by the other kingdom that want these things so they can lock them up or find a way to destroy them. Well, the players are going through Baruch Malkuth for reasons, and they come across a slaver caravan, which they attack, they liberate the people, they feel like heroes, and in a storage compartment, they find one of these halos. And you can imagine the players are like, well, can we destroy it? And the answer is no, it's an artifact, and artifacts are extremely difficult to destroy, if not impossible. So they look at the situation going, and the players that are at that are at an impasse. They are disagreeing with each other. Some players are like, all right, easy. We'll take it out in the middle of nowhere, we'll bury it, and no one will ever find it. And I was like, some people are like, nothing ever stays buried forever, one player said. It's like, if we put it out there, someone will find it. And the guy's like, no, I will put it somewhere, I will bury it. The chances, it may take centuries for them to find it. If that takes centuries, that's fine. We just take it out of our hands. The other player is just like, no, we should keep it. We should take it and take it back to one of these kingdoms. Regardless if they give us a reward or not, we put it into the hands that are safe. And then the other player's like, yes, but we can't guarantee that we'll get there. We have a mission. We can't go straight there. We have a mission we have to go on. If we're keeping this thing, we may lose it. It's not worth it. And not only that, as another player said, we don't want this. Like, we don't want this near us in any way. This thing is just bad news. We just don't want this. And so we had one player just insisting that, like, it's too much of a risk to just go out there and bury it. And I'm sitting there watching this group, and, as a GM, we want to give players complete freedom of what they want to do, but we also want to make sure that if there's a point where we can steer them in the right direction. And I know that technically it would be better for them to take it because it could help them later on. But in the end, if they don't, it's not a big deal. I can make it work. Anyway, so one player goes off to bury it. Now, as a GM, one of the things people don't talk about, which happens in every game, and if this hasn't happened in your history as a GM, I am shocked, when players hand the GM notes. A GM will hand players notes for something private, but a player will hand a GM a note as well. And I've had situations where huge conversations have occurred with notes. And later on, we started doing it digitally through Messenger. And this time, we didn't have that. So it was notes. And a player slips me a note. It was the one that wanted to keep the halo. And he's a ranger, so it's not like he couldn't figure out where this thing was and follow the other player. He sends me a note going, I want to secretly follow that player, and I want to recover the artifact when that player doesn't know. Now, one player is not a ranger. The other player is a ranger. So I'm like, you know what? Yes, I'm not even going to have him roll. He's better at this than the other player. And I responded to the note going, yes, after the player leaves, you go and you uncover the halo and you keep it secret. And he goes, and then that's it. That's the whole conversation. The players go through the rest of their adventure in Baruch Malkuth. And I kid you not, it's several weeks, several sessions of games, probably a half a dozen sessions of them going through all this. They finally get back to this fantasy kingdom, and they find out that this Tekken City is literally rolling down on them. They're about less than a day away. And the players realize that even though this Tekken Bastion is populated by, thousands of people, it's the aggressor, and we have to stop this city at all costs. So In Amethyst, once again, Amethyst is a techno fantasy. For those people who don't know, it's a blend of fantasy and science fiction, but it's a blend where magic can disrupt technology, like an electromagnetic pulse, but more invasive. It can break down chemical reactions. It can break down guns and internal combustion engines and so forth. And the more powerful the magic item, the more it can disrupt, and the more technologically advanced something is, the easier it is to disrupt. So it's a bit of a battle. So that's why you see a lot of low tech stuff in Amethyst, because it's the least susceptible to disruption. And so the players are trying to figure out, well, how can we stop this city? It's a huge city. It's a group of 5 adventurers. Even if we could get access, how can we stop this thing? And as always, they go, well, we cause a disruption event. We cause a massive disruption event to shut the whole facility down, and the whole city will stop. And I, as a NPC, says something that the players wouldn't know. I go, well, this city has been rolling uninterrupted for years. If it could be disrupted by ambient magic, it would have broken down a long time ago. This mechanism is extremely powerful and is so built up to be immune to magical disruption, you would need an artifact level magic item to create the disruption event to stop this city. And that's how I worded it. Like, if you wanted to, like I said, the problem is, and here I am trying to, I'm specifically wording in a way so that the players might think that as a GM, I'm telling them that this is not the solution. And so, but that's actually a lie. I know what the solution is, and the solution was there already. And I go, the problem is that ambient or even low-level magic disruption can't shut this thing. This thing is overbuilt to be reliable in ambient EDF. You'd have to have an artifact-level disruption event to create the type of magical outburst to shut this thing down. And we don't have that type of artifact here. Now, the player that had sent me the note, the way our tables arranged up, it's actually couches and tables and so forth. And so the player that had secretly taken this Halo from a month earlier or so was sitting his back to me, and he was looking towards the rest of the group, towards the table. And there was just this moment of pause, about 5 seconds, where the gears are turning in his head, and he realizes that he just walked directly into my plan. And all that I had planned is so far ahead, and I was smiling for the entire month. Here I am thinking, will he pick up on the clue? And he did. And there was just this, I can't even kind of explain it, but his back was turned, and he just slowly turns and looks at me like this, because he knows exactly what I mean. And by the time his head rotates back to the group, the entire group is lasering their eyes at him because they know he did something. And one player's like, "What did you do?" And the player's like, "I take the Halo and I put it on the table." And the group reaction was livid. They're like, "We agreed that we weren't going to take this with us." And the guy's like, "We needed it, and it looks like we needed it anyway." And then they were having this argument. The guy's like, "Turns out it was this moment where I just leaned back as a GM, and I started just trying to keep myself from laughing. The fact that all of this just worked out perfectly. And we had this moment where I just fed the solution, and the one player goes and looks at me and is like, "You motherfucker." Yeah, I did exactly what you wanted me to do. And I'm like, yes, you did. It worked. If they had agreed to take it, then the revelation wouldn't be there. It'd be like, "Oh, that's fantastic. We have the item right here." But the fact that they decided unanimously to not take it, to bury it, and one player decided to rebel secretly, and turns out that was the solution, I was just ecstatic. Because I imagine the players were like, "Damn, if only we had taken the Halo," and then that player lays it down, and they're like, "Well, thanks for you." But it was instead like, how could you do this? You betrayed us for taking, like, dude, we need this artifact. We have to take this artifact into this city, and it would cause a disruption event in order to stop this city. And it worked. That plan absolutely worked. They got into the city, they snuck in, they planted this thing, it caused a massive disruption event and stopped the city before it could destroy this kingdom. But it was amazing. And now, as an amendment to this story, as a denouement, another few months later, they are in this Tekken bastion, another one across the ocean called Porto, and they are offered a virus that would stop the breeding cycle of an invasive species. And the players are all unanimous in going, well, no, like, we cannot dictate. Like, these are all good players. We cannot dictate the future of the species, no matter how invasive they may be. We're deciding, we're basically saying, are we willing to sign the genocide of this species? We are not. We are not going to take this. We're not going to take this offer of this virus. And I'm like, okay, will another player, once again, slip me a note and says, I secretly try to get this virus? Yes. In fact, of the 5 players, 3 of them sent me a note saying they wanted the virus. So in the end, when they realized that they actually might need to use it, one player was just like, well, man, if we had that virus, it could have actually helped in our situation. And at that point, one player takes out his vial, and then the other 2 players take out their vial simultaneously. And they all look at each other and like, we clearly have a trust issue with our group. That we're all willing to secretly do these things. But in the second situation, the fact that more than half the group all decided on their own to do it individually was hilarious. But the first one was glorious. The fact that one player decided to retrieve this halo, and it turns out being the solution that the players needed to solve the crisis at the end. And I could have written something, and I was like, okay, how can I make this ending work if they don't have the halo? And I could have figured out numerous solutions. But when that player sent me that note, I was like, oh, this is gonna be good. This is gonna be amazing. And yeah, just a few weeks later, it was that reaction. It was me saying that obviously fed line that maybe the players won't pick up on, but that one player might. And when I said, yeah, you need an artifact level item, magical disruption event, to create the type of field that will break the city down, and we don't have that. And to just have that player just kind of go, just rotate slowly and give me that look. It's still, I mean, I have a lot of great moments in my game. I could go into details. Most of them require so much setup that the payoff wouldn't be worth it. But that moment galvanizes to me why GMs enjoy being game masters, why we like playing homebrew games, why we like telling stories. It's for moments like that, moments where things just work out. Yes, there are hilarious moments where the players are completely daft and they don't fully understand. And if you ever want a good example of players being completely daft and the GM just banging his head, watch, I think, the late episode 2nd season of Harmon Quest. There's a fantastic moment regarding a mirror where it's in an audience, and the GM literally waves to the audience, and they all say the same thing, and the players had no idea that was the solution, because it happens. But anyway, guys, that was story time. I'm going to, once again, edit this thing so it's not half an hour long. Thank you for listening, and I'll have more content for you guys later. Bye.
Then disaster.